Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 350 library systems across the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible for communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so excited to have neuroendocrinologist and best-selling author, Dr. Robert Lustig, with us to talk about the true purpose of nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Lustig. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon. I am excellent, and hopefully your audience will be too.
After this talk, I'm sure we all will be. But before we jump in, I just want to give everybody that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then I will introduce our guest and turn things over. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but as always, you can submit questions during this live event by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. There are quite a few of you tuning in today, so we will take as many questions as we can during the Q&A period for the last 15 minutes of the talk. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today. Robert H. Lustig, MD, MSL, is an emeritus professor of pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and a member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF. Dr. Lustig is a neuroendocrinologist with expertise in metabolism, obesity, and nutrition. He is one of the leaders of the current anti-sugar movement that is changing the food industry. He has dedicated his retirement from clinical medicine to help fix the food supply in any way he can to reduce human suffering and to salvage the environment. Dr. Lustig graduated from MIT in 1976 and received his MD from Cornell University Medical College in 1980. He also received his Master's of Studies in Law degree at the University of California, Hastings College of Law in 2013. He is the author of the popular books Fat Chance, The Hacking of the American Mind, and Metabolical, The Lure and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. He's the Chief Science Officer of the nonprofit Eat Real. He's on the advisory boards of the UC Davis Innovation Institute for Food and Health, the Center for Humane Technology, Simplex Health, Levels Health, and Read Out Health, and he is the Chief Medical Officer of Biolumin Technologies, Fugal, Perfect, and Kalen Health. Again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you now.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank all of you for the opportunity to speak with you today about what I think is the single biggest problem in the world today. Now, you might say, no, climate change is, or war and social instability is. Well, actually, they're all dependent on the food supply. In fact, if you fixed the food, you would fix all of these as well. Agriculture is a primary contributor to the problem of climate change. And believe it or not, what food does to your brain has everything to do with how angry you are. And so understanding this concept of metabolic health, which I'm going to explain to you today, and how it ultimately is the same as mental health, is actually also the same as global health and planetary health. So I'm hoping that, I'll be able to, explain this all to you in 45 minutes. Good luck to me, but let's go ahead and get started. So the title of this talk is The True Purpose of Nutrition. And so I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is that God has given you this wonderful Lamborghini in the upper left. All right? Everyone is in possession of this phenomenally, fine-tuned car. But your job is to keep that Lamborghini from becoming that jalopy on the lower right. All right. In fact, this is the true purpose of nutrition, is basically preventing your body from becoming a jalopy. And I will show you how that works in non-scientific terms, hopefully terms that you can take away, because if I did it with the science, it would take us 5 hours. So we're going to do it with a car analogy instead. So before I start, I do have these disclosures that Brandon mentioned. I did write these books for the general public. I am chief medical officer of these companies, a paid advisor to these other companies, and an unpaid advisor to a food company. Do not take money from them, but we are actually changing, re-engineering the entire portfolio of this consumer process food company in the Middle East to be metabolically healthy, based on the principles in my book, Metabolical. So that's kind of cool. And here are our learning objectives for today. I'm going to explain these subcellular pathologies, but I'm going to do it with the car analogy. I'm going to explain that exercise does not mitigate these pathologies. People think you can outrun a bad diet. You can't. I'm going to show you that ultra-processed food is the issue for both metabolic and mental health, and ultimately the precepts of good nutrition. And these are them. Feed the gut, protect the liver, support the brain, and you will see why. All right. This is a paper that came out in 2001 based on 2000 data. And what it said was that in 2000, there were 151 million people with diabetes stalking the earth. And what was projected for 2010, 10 years later, was that that number would increase to 221 million. That's a 46% increase, or an annualized inflation rate, as the actuaries do it, of 3.88%. This is not what we saw. What we actually saw was that 221 was actually 285 million. In fact, that's an annualized inflation rate of 6.55%, a doubling over what was anticipated. By 2014, that number was up to 422 million. That's an annualized inflation rate of 10.3%, a tripling over what was anticipated. By 2019, we were up to 463 million. What is now projected for 2030 is 568 million. And by 2050, 785 million people with diabetes. Now, that's the medical side. What about the money side? You know, here we have the money going to hospitals, here we have the money going to doctors, and here we have the money going to pharma. When you add them up, they do not add up to the total cost, because the rest of it is going to the care and treatment of chronic metabolic disease, like diabetes, but also like dementia, like cancer, like heart disease. All of these are the diseases of metabolic syndrome due to metabolic dysfunction, disorders in what we call metabolic health. I'll explain what that is in a moment. Now, here we have the change in life expectancy in all of the developed countries in the world over time. And what you can see is that here we were, the United States, with the arrow, and we were in the middle of the pack back in 1970, and we have slowly but surely gone to the bottom of the pack. And in fact, we now have not increased our lifespan, we have actually decreased our lifespan. Now, this over here is COVID, but all this other was happening beforehand. All right. So something is wrong. And if you compare us to Japan, we are paying an 8-year longevity tax just by living in the United States. And if you have obesity, you're paying a 15-year longevity tax. And if you have metabolic syndrome, which we'll define in a moment, you have a 20-year longevity tax. And most of us have metabolic syndrome. In fact, 93% of American adults have some form of metabolic dysfunction. Only 7% have good cardiometabolic health. So when you actually look at the money in health expenditure per capita here on the x-axis against life expectancy, look how far we have fallen off the rails compared to all of these other countries. Okay, we are spending more and getting less. We have not solved this problem. In fact, we have only made it worse. And the question is, why is that? With all of our technology, with all of our medical acumen, with everything, with all of our hospital systems, only gets worse. And the reason is because we haven't even remotely come to solving the problem. And this is going to cause Medicare to be insolvent by the year 2026. This is my favorite Dilbert. Some of you still like Dilbert. I do. Health problems and absenteeism are a huge cost to this business. So give me a raise or I'll eat all unhealthy food and avoid all forms of exercise. You already do those things. How could you possibly know that? Well, because he's 93% of the American population. That's why. And here's the reason, because everybody wants the pill. Everybody wants the pill. Nobody wants to change their lifestyle. Everybody thinks there's a pill. Well, there's a shot. There's this thing called Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro and, Zepbound, and there'll be other ones coming soon. The question is this the answer? Well, this shot here costs $1,300 a month and no one can afford it. And they can't even keep up with demand. And so the people who are getting it are only people who can afford it because no insurance company is paying for it. And the high cost of these drugs is threatening coverage entirely altogether. So this is not the answer. Plus, the side effect profile of these medicines, these GLP-1 analogs, are so significant that the FDA has now put warnings on all of the labels, and there may actually be restrictions on who can access them and who can use them. So this is by no means a panacea. Now, the reason is because we have not even remotely fixed the problem, and the problem is our food. And that's what today is about, explaining what has happened to our food. Now, in order to be able to do that, I have to define 3 terms for you. And the problem is that these terms often get conglomerated together and people don't really know what the difference is. So food science, nutrition, metabolic health. Food science is what happens to food between the ground and the mouth. Nutrition is what happens to food between the mouth and the cell. Metabolic health is what happens inside the cell. So as you can see, they are all different. But it's only what happens inside the cell that leads to disease. All of the diseases of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, these are all intracellular dysfunctions because of metabolic health. They are disruptions in metabolic health. So nutrition is only valuable as it informs metabolic health, but it is one step divorced from it. Food science is only valuable as it informs metabolic health, and it is 2 steps divorced from it. So we really have to understand metabolic health in order to be able to fix any of these problems. And I'm not the only one saying this. This is actually from the World Economic Forum, a brief that came out last year, that basically said the true purpose of nutrition is metabolic health, because if nutrition does not solve this, all it does is make everything else worse. And that's what we've been doing for the last 50 years. We've been making everything else worse. And that's why every single country on the planet has experienced an increase in obesity and an increase in all of the chronic metabolic diseases that I just told you about. So, metabolic health, what is it? That's where we're going. So this is where our car analogy comes in. So our Lamborghini to jalopy. There are 8, count them, 8 pathologies, 8 things that go on inside your cell that dictate whether you maintain that Lamborghini in tip-top running condition or whether or not it's going to dilapidate into this jalopy. And I call them the hateful or grateful 8, with apologies to Quentin Tarantino. Okay. And so here they are. Number 1, glycation. Now, glycation is the binding of glucose to proteins and rendering them inflexible. This is like carbon deposits on your intake manifolds. Number 2, oxidative stress. In fact, specific foods generate what are known as reactive oxygen species. And what they can do is they can damage different lipids, different proteins, rendering the cell vulnerable and sometimes killing the cell. This would be like rusting. Okay. In fact, that is oxidative stress caused by iron, but it doesn't have to be caused by iron. It can be caused by other things too. So it can be rusting of the body or it can be rusting of the chassis. Number 3, mitochondrial dysfunction. So the mitochondria are the little energy burning factories inside each of your cells. When they don't work, you can't generate the energy you need to be able to go from one gear to the next. That would be like having a defective transmission. Number 4, insulin resistance. Now, as you know, you need oxygen in order to be able to burn. Okay, and that oxygen used to come through this thing called a carburetor. Now, of course, we have fuel injection, but once upon a time we had carburetors, and if they were sticky, the car, instead of going vroom vroom, would go putt putt. You ever hear a Lamborghini go putt putt? I have. Number 5, membrane integrity. Okay, and that would be like having an oil leak. All right. And if you have an oil leak, you're going to be in big trouble really soon. Number 6, inflammation would be like having a rotted fuel line. Okay, and that rotted fuel line could even catch fire. And in fact, that's basically what inflammation is. It's a fire out of control inside your body. Number 7, methylation would be like having defective spark plugs. So instead of running on a V8, you might be running on a V2 because of methyl groups being added to either proteins or DNA, and those leading to defective signaling. And lastly, my favorite, autophagy. Now, autophagy actually bears, demands a slightly increased definition. All right, auto, self, phagy, eating, self-eating. In fact, your cells of your body make junk all the time. They make lipid peroxidation products, protein denaturation products, protein aggregates. These have to be cleared away. Okay, all the junk has to be cleared away in order to be able to lay down new stuff to keep the cells in tip-top running condition, like, basically changing the oil. If you don't change the oil, you got a problem. Well, that's what autophagy is, and is getting rid of all this junk. Autophagy goes down as you get older, but there are ways to keep it up. All right. And, basically getting rid of the junk is super important. Think of it this way. You have a house. All right. Let's say the garbage men go on strike. First week, no problem. Second week, starting to maybe smell a little bit. Third week, the rats start invading. Fourth week, you're going to start having problems with your pipes. And by the 5th week, you're moving out of your house. Okay. You need the garbage men. So autophagy is garbage night for the cell. All of these form the hateful or grateful 8. If they're all working right, you will live to 110 playing tennis. If they are working wrong, you will be 40 on a gurney with 2 stumps on dialysis waiting for your next stroke. And here's the key to these 8 subcellular pathologies. None of them have a drug. There's not one of these that has a drug that works. These are not druggable, but they all are foodable. You can fix them with food. Now, here are the different things that cause each of the 8. Glycations caused by carbohydrate, fructose, that sweet molecule in sugar, lack of fiber. Oxidative stress caused by glucose, fructose, and trans fats. Mitochondrial dysfunction by fructose, omega-6s, trans fats, and lack of micronutrients. Insulin resistance by fructose and branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine, high in corn-fed beef, chicken, and fish, like processed food. Membrane integrity, lack of omega-3s, because omega-3s are necessary for membrane integrity, keeping your membranes stable. Inflammation, carbohydrate and gluten in some, omega-6s, fructose, lack of fiber. Methylation, lack of folic acid and other B vitamins that keep the methylation down. And autophagy, frequent feeding, and lack of fiber. So as you can see, food matters to all of these. So you say to me, yeah, sure. but, I can just up my exercise. And exercise will burn calories, yeah, but exercise does not actually fix any of these problems. And here's why. Because of these 8, 4 of them are actually not amenable to exercise. In fact, the oxidative stress actually gets worse with exercise. So no way, no how, you can't outrun a bad diet. This is part of debunking what we currently think. We currently think that the problem is obesity, and all you have to do is eat less and exercise more. What I hope I've just demonstrated to you is that the eat less actually doesn't work and hasn't worked, because eat less what? Well, eat less all of this stuff, sure. Okay, but that's not what we're doing. We're eating less fat. But you'll notice the only thing that's a problem is trans fats. So you get the idea. You can't outrun a bad diet. Our nutrition is the problem, and because it ultimately impacts metabolic health negatively. And specifically, it is this stuff here called now ultra-processed foods. Now, this is a relatively new term, but I think you all kind of know what this is. Oliver Wendell Holmes, defined pornography. He says, I know it when I see it. You kind of know ultra-processed foods when you see it too. So my question to you is ultra-processed food actually food? Is it? Just because they call it ultra-processed food, does that make it food? Well, in order to answer this question, we have to look at the definition of food. Well, here's the definition of food right out of the dictionary. Substrate that contributes either to the burning or growth of an organism. 100% agree with this definition. So we're going to use this definition to examine this question. So let's take burning first. So here we have a cell, and here is the mitochondria, the little energy burning factories inside each cell. Okay, they make the ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, which is the chemical energy that powers the cell and lets the cell do whatever it is it's supposed to do. Now, here we have glucose, okay, 1/2 of the molecule sugar, and here we have fructose, the other half of the molecule dietary sugar. Glucose and fructose, together they are sucrose. When they're apart, they're high fructose corn syrup. Everybody got it? Glucose and fructose. Turns out glucose actually stimulates mitochondrial function, mitochondrial beta oxidation. And it does it by activating 2 enzymes. Glucose activates this enzyme here, AMPK, AMP kinase. This is like the fuel gauge on the liver cell. Tells the liver, make more mitochondria because we need more energy now. And it also activates this enzyme here, HADH, hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase, which is necessary to split 2 carbon fragments off fatty acids. Okay, so glucose, for lack of a better word, we can call good. Fructose, on the other hand, inhibits 3, count them, 3 separate enzymes. It inhibits AMP kinase. It inhibits ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is also necessary to cleave those 2 carbon fragments. And it also inhibits this guy over here, CPT1A, carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1A, which is necessary to get the fatty acids from the outside to the inside so that they can be burned. The sum total of which is that fructose inhibits beta oxidation. So for lack of a better word, we can say fructose is bad. Glucose, good. Fructose, bad. Sugar, both. Ron Kahn, the CEO of Joslin Diabetes Center, said about this study, the most important takeaway of this study is that high fructose in the diet is bad. It's not bad because it's more calories, but because it has effects on liver metabolism to make it worse at burning fat. As a result, adding fructose to the diet makes the liver store more fat, and this is bad for the liver and bad for whole body metabolism. Exactly right. Okay, 100% agree. So, burning. Ultra-processed food, high sugar, poor burning. Let's go to growth. This is work done by my colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsonigo-Arnan at Hebrew University, Jerusalem. And she's head of the Department of Nutrition there. And what she has shown is that when you feed ultra-processed food to animals, it washes out bone. So you can see here's control bone and here's ultra-processed food bone. You can see the porosity getting worse, which means the risk for fracture getting worse. And you can see that here, the tensile strength of the bone way down. And you can see the hollowed out nature of the bone here. And you can see the change in stiffness, the change in fracture load. Okay. And you look at the cortex of the bone where the strength is. So here's in red means high density of calcium. That's in the in the control bone. But here's the ultra-processed food treated bone. You see the cortical calcium there? Not there because it didn't get laid down. And here's the trabecular analysis inside the bone. What a disaster. Okay. It's like gone. It's like hollowed out. Okay. So in fact, ultra-processed food inhibits growth. It inhibits linear growth. It inhibits trabecular growth. It inhibits cortical bone growth. It inhibits length. So bottom line, all of these are worse, burning and growth, both worse with ultra-processed food. So the question is ultra-processed food food? Well, I would argue, actually, no, it's not. And if it's not food, what is it? Well, then it's poison. And in fact, we have many studies now, which I'm now going to show you, okay, equating ultra-processed food consumption in a correlation fashion with obesity, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, metabolic syndrome, Crohn's disease, cancer, dementia, depression, and ultimately early death. And that's what the data show all over the world. My colleagues at Sapien Labs, which is a nonprofit, and I am now an advisor to them, were able to demonstrate that ultra-processed food consumption correlates with mental health. And you can see here that exercise unrelated, because it doesn't matter which one, several times a week or less than once a week, doesn't matter. More ultra-processed food here on the x-axis, worsening mental health questionnaire scores on the y-axis. That's true for global, and in the United States, it also doesn't matter whether it's high income or low income. More ultra-processed food, more depression. And the reason for that is probably manyfold. One of them has to do with tryptophan, because tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin, and serotonin is necessary to prevent depression. That's why we take SSRIs for depression. In addition, the high insulin inhibits trophic factors from being able to remodel the brain, which also leads to depression. So mental health and systemic health, all made worse by ultra-processed food consumption. Okay, now I've thrown this term ultra-processed food around for a while, and I haven't defined it. So let's define it. Best way to define it is with examples. So let's take an apple. My colleague, Dr. Carlos Monteiro, who is a public health epidemiologist at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, has developed a system, a categorization system for food processing. And he calls it the NOVA system. And there are 4 classes in the NOVA system. NOVA class 1 would be an apple picked off a tree. NOVA class 2 would be apple slices, destemmed, deseeded, maybe deskinned. NOVA class 3 would be apple sauce, macerated, cooked, possibly preservative added, maybe vitamins supplemented, possibly even a little extra added sugar. NOVA class 4 would be a McDonald's apple pie. So my question to you is, how much apple is in that McDonald's apple pie? Any? Or has something been done to it? The point is that only this NOVA class 4 correlates with that chronic disease. All of the studies I just showed you showed that NOVA class 1 through 3 demonstrates no signal. It's only the NOVA class 4 that is correlated with all of those diseases of metabolic syndrome I just showed you. But that is 57% of US consumption, and it is 73% of the items in the grocery store. So 1 out of every 4 items in the grocery store you can eat. The other 3 will kill you. So the food industry will tell you that processed food has a role to play in nutritious and sustainable diets. I will tell you that processed food is an experiment that failed. The question is, who's right? Well, right now, ultra-processed food accounts for over half of UK family purchases and 57% of US purchases and 73% of the US food supply. Does this matter? Oh yeah, it matters. So you've heard this term now, food as medicine. And in fact, insurance companies are starting to consider actually paying for the food in order to be able to get people to eat healthier. Because obviously, fresh food, good food, real food is expensive because all the ultra-processed foods are subsidized because the processed food ingredients are subsidized, corn, wheat, soy, sugar. So food is medicine or food is poison? Which is it? It depends on the food, clearly. Now, why is this the case? And how did we get here? As David Letterman used to do, he had his top 10 greatest hits for everything. Well, these are our top 10. And you'll notice all of these were the government. The government did every single one of these. All right. Starts way back. This is the second oldest piece of legislation in the history of America. Okay. The sugar tariff. And the goal was to keep foreign sugar out by raising the price so that US sugar companies could actually take hold and grow. Well, that's still there. 1933, we had the Dust Bowl. Okay, and the Dust Bowl meant there was a destitute population in the American Southwest that was going to die of famine. We had to be able to get the food from the Northeast to the Southwest. The problem was if you just put fresh food on the railroad cars, it would be rancid by the time it got there. So the government had to incentivize the food industry to process the grain in order to be able to put it into 10-pound bags and bake it up on site. And we saved an entire destitute population all the way through World War II with food processing. So that was the original Farm Bill of 1933, and it was the first food subsidies. This is when we started subsidizing corn, wheat, soy, sugar. 1959, we had the fall of Batista and the rise of Castro in Cuba. That cut off our Cuban sugar supply. It altered our sugar imports, and it led to the rise of the Fanjul brothers, who run U.S. Sugar in Florida today and give money to both political parties in a big way. And no one crosses the Fanjul brothers. In 1971, Richard Nixon, extending Johnson's war on poverty, realized that fluctuating food prices made populations angry, political unrest. And so he told his agriculture secretary, Earl Butz, to go out to the heartland and make food cheap. And what Butz said was, row to row, furrow to furrow, get bigger, get out. And that was the start of monoculture. That's why all the corn's in Iowa and all the cattle are in Kansas. It's because of Earl Butz. 1977 was the McGovern Commission and the first dietary guidelines for Americans. And the very first dietary guideline said, eat less sugar. Okay, sorry, it said eat less fat. My mistake. Eat less fat. And then they had to change it because if you eat less fat, the food tastes like cardboard. So they said, eat more carbohydrate. And now we've got an explosion in obesity and metabolic syndrome. 1980, Hurricane Allen destroyed the Caribbean sugar crop. All right, that was never hit our shores, but that was the thing that gave the food industry the green light to start using high fructose corn syrup because it was homegrown and natural. And that was the start of things like New Coke back in 1985. Everybody remember New Coke? That was high fructose corn syrup. In 1986, the FDA reviewed the data on sugar and decided that results were inconclusive, except that they'd stopped their analysis at 1980 And that was really before the onset of high fructose corn syrup. And it was also when our mean consumption was only 50 grams of sugar a day. It is now 94 and was as high as 120. So more than double. And so this needs to be redone. 1990, the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act. This is what gave us the nutrition facts label, except there is no recommended daily value of sugar because the food industry doesn't want there to be. 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or DSHEA. Okay, that's what led to dietary supplements and nutraceuticals being everywhere. And do you know who sponsored this in Congress? Orrin Hatch, senator from Utah. And do you know why he sponsored this? Because his son ran a dietary supplement company. 1997, the Food Safety Modernization Act. And this is when they took the generally recognized as safe list and privatized it. And now any company can decide any ingredient is safe just by getting a bunch of scientists together and declaring it so. FDA doesn't have anything to say about it anymore because they privatized it out. So as you can see, the government has absolutely aided and abetted this entire problem and made it even worse. Now, the money. The food industry grosses $9 trillion a year globally, but we spend $11 trillion a year on health costs related to food. We spend $7 trillion a year on environmental costs related to food. We spend $1 trillion a year on productivity issues related to food. So when you do the math, we are actually in a $10 trillion deficit every single year cleaning up the food industry's mess. And I don't know if you saw it, but just yesterday, a global food economics consortium came out and said that if we fixed the food system, we would be able to recoup $10 trillion a year. Well, here it is. These are the $10 trillion a year. So two different ways, two different organizations came up with the exact same thing within a year of each other, basically telling us we have to fix the food supply or else it's all over. And indeed, that's right. All right, so with the last 10 minutes, I'm going to show you how one does this. Metabolic health is the goal. Now, what are the strategies? Well, we have to do two things. We have to promote improved metabolism, and we have to inhibit inflammation. So we have to define what we mean. What is the definition of healthy? Now, my friend, and he is a friend, he's been to my house for dinner, Michael Pollan, famously said in Food Rules, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Now, I have a problem with each one of those clauses. Eat food, what does that mean? Well, some people need a low-fat diet, others need a high-fat diet. Not too much doesn't take into account this mitochondrial dysfunction issue. Because if your mitochondria is dysfunctional, it doesn't really matter how much food you eat. And mostly plants. Hate to tell you, but Coke, Doritos, and Oreos are all vegan. So that ain't the answer. Because it's not what's in the food. It's what's been done to the food. And really what they did to the food. That is, the food industry did to the food that matters. And none of that is listed on the food label because they don't want you to know. They only want you to know what's in the food because they have to. Okay? They didn't even want to do that until 1990 when the federal government made them. I suggest actually three different principles. Okay? And it's in the book. And these are the three principles. We call this the metabolic matrix. And it is three things. Feed the gut, protect the liver, support the brain. And I will go through each of these relatively quickly because our time is short, but feed the gut. Okay, we're talking about digestion, absorption, and metabolism. Unprocessed food feeds the gut. Processed food feeds you. You want to feed the gut because if you don't feed the gut will feed on you. In fact, here's a fiber-rich diet, and you can see this pink here is the mucin layer, and you can see that the cells, the intestinal epithelial cells, are in good shape because this mucin layer is protecting it from all the junk in your intestine. Remember, your intestine is a sewer. I mean, the definition of a sewer is a pipe with you know what in it. Well, our intestine is a sewer. This is one of the barriers. There are three barriers. There's a physical barrier, the mucin layer. There's a biochemical barrier called tight junctions, which I'll show you in a minute. And there is a immunological barrier called Th17 cells. All right. Each of these is important to keep the intestine working properly. If you feed a human a fiber-free diet, the bacteria don't get what they need. They start eating the mucin layer and they start destroying your intestinal epithelial cells. That leads to systemic inflammation. Higher dietary fiber correlates with reduction in all chronic diseases, all-cause mortality, coronary disease, type 2 diabetes, colon cancer. Now, fiber does 6 things, but you have to have soluble and insoluble fiber together. That's what's in real food. It acts as a barrier to sugar absorption. It reduces the insulin response because insulin is the bad guy in this story. It feeds the intestinal microbiome, which is necessary, or the microbiome will feed on you. It induces the satiety signal sooner, so you won't need second portions. The colonic bacteria will turn the soluble fiber into short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, anti-Alzheimer's. And the insoluble fiber will remove cancer cells from the colon. So you get 6 things out of fiber, all good. Now, the food industry can add soluble fiber back, like fiber 1 bars. That will feed the microbiome and it will help with short-chain fatty acids. And that's not nothing. I'm not saying that that's useless, but 2 ain't 6, right? And if you gave people cardboard, you could induce the satiety signal sooner and you can remove cancer cells from the colon. 2 ain't 6. You want all 6, you need both. And the food industry doesn't know how to do it. That's why real food. Okay, so fiber is critical because it is basically coating all of that starch. So this is a wheat kernel, and here's the germ that has the nucleic acids, the polyphenols, the flavonoids are all in the germ, the antioxidants. You need those, okay? And here's the husk, the bran, okay, covering the whole thing, which is 25% of the weight of the kernel. And here's the starchy endosperm here. This is what flour is when you macerate this and powder it. Okay. Point is, when you turn a wheat berry into flour, you're taking the husk off and you're taking the germ out. And the reason you're taking the germ out is because the germ doesn't taste very good and it also stales and goes rancid relatively quickly. So if you're trying to put stuff in a 10-pound bag, okay, you need to take these things off. Okay, we learned that in 1933, but it's not helping us any now because fiber is critical. It does all of these things. Fiber consumption reduces the glucose response, reduces the insulin response. It is the thing that it promotes metabolism. And processed food is fiberless food. Okay, number 2, protect the liver. Well, protect the liver from what? Well, take a look. Here we see what is known as an MRI fat fraction map of an obese person. Notice the love handles on the side. But now take a look at this guy's liver. See, it's dark. 2.6% fat. This is fine. This is a metabolically healthy person. Okay, fat, but metabolically healthy. Now take a look at this guy. Notice obese, okay. But take a look at this liver, 24% liver fat. You see this ground glass appearance here? Okay, this is metabolic syndrome. This is fatty liver disease. This guy is sick. This guy's going to die. Now take a look at this guy. Notice no obesity to speak of, actually thin. Okay, but take a look at his liver, 23% liver fat. Thin sick, fat healthy. So it's not the fat you can see on the outside that counts, it's the fat on the inside you can't see that matters. And how did that fat get in the liver in the first place? Well, sugar, fructose in particular, because fructose does not go to glycogen. Glucose goes to glycogen. Fructose goes to the mitochondria. The mitochondria get overwhelmed, get turned into fat. And sometimes that fat will precipitate in the liver. Now you've got a lipid droplet. Now you got fatty liver disease. And now you've got insulin resistance, which drives those chronic metabolic pathologies we talked about before, the hateful eight. So this is the bad guy and this is the driver. We at UCSF took 43 kids with metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease. And what we did was we took the sugar out of their diets. We we gave them a glucose for fructose exchange. We took the sugar out of their diets and replaced it with starch. And at baseline, they had lots of fat and they had lots of triglyceride. 9 days of fructose restriction, their liver fat went down 22%. They're turning sugar into fat in the liver went down 46%. Their triglycerides went down 49%. Their visceral fat went down 7%. And most importantly, their pancreas started making insulin properly. We reversed their metabolic syndrome with no change in calories and no change in weight, just by getting the offending toxin out of their diet. In the intestine, fructose also alters these proteins here called tight junctions, right? Gluten is an inhibitor of those, but so is fructose. Fructose nitrates those tight junctions here, allowing bacteria and lipopolysaccharides, bad guys, to get into your bloodstream to basically cause insulin resistance at your liver. I'm going to pass this for time. Okay. And lastly, support the brain. Okay, well, what's your brain made of? Well, it's made of fat, is what it's made of. And there's omega-6s and there's omega-3s. You've heard of both of them. This is what's in seed oils, which is, of course, ultra-processed food. This is what's in marine life, which is a whole different story, and not enough marine life in our diet. So omega-3s are ALA, EPA, and DHA, all necessary for neuronal stabilization. Omega-6s are all of these, LA, AA. Bottom line, these are pro-inflammatory. They make prostaglandins, thromboxanes, leukotrienes. These are all pro-inflammatory, and these are all anti-inflammatory. So your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is super important. And it turns out that depression is associated with low omega-3s. It's associated with depression. It's associated with ADHD. In addition, zinc deficiency, selenium deficiency, also associated with mental health problems. So the bottom line is, we know what we have to do. We have to feed the gut. How do you do that? More soluble and insoluble fiber, called real food. We have to protect the liver, less sugar, real food. We have to support the brain, more ALA, EPA, DHA, real food. We need a real food diet, which is also a low insulin diet. The challenge is getting rid of calories, because everyone still thinks calories are the problem. We have to debunk the calorie, because this is not about calories. Thin people get sick too. In fact, 50% of the normal weight population has metabolic syndrome. That's not because of calories. It's because of their diet. Now, I am the chief science officer of a nonprofit trying to get real food to your children in public schools. It is called Eat Real. Okay, you can find it online at eatreal.org. Now, your children are eating crap in school, and the reason is because there's no place to make the food in the school. Once upon a time, every school had a food preparation facility, and it had, remember the blue hairs with the hair nets? Okay, they're all gone. How come? Because the Department of Education passed an ordinance back in 1971 saying that every cafeteria in America, in American schools, had to make book. They had to fend for themselves. They couldn't be a loss leader for the school. And so every school said, how are we going to do this? Well, in came Aramark and Cisco and Guggenheim and McDonald's saying, hey, we'll do it for you. We'll supply every kid with a, quote, nutritious meal every single day. All right, well, they did that. And what they then said was, now you can take the food preparation facilities out of your school because you don't need them and you're going to need it for classrooms. And that was the goal all along. And now the schools are the hostage to the food industry because they have no choice. So my question to you is a quiz. What is the largest fast food franchise in America? It is our nation's public schools. Because if you take all of the McDonald's and all of the Burger Kings and all of the Wendy's and all of the Subways in America and add them up, it is only half as many as this nation's public schools. This is the problem. We have to fix it, and we can. We have developed a new business model that gets real food into schools. I advise all of you to go on to eatreal.org to see what we are doing and how we are doing it. And if you are interested, if you can get your school district interested in this, we can help you. And we would be delighted to help you. eatreal.org. So with that, I hope what I've done today is explain to you what is the problem, why metabolic health is the issue and not calories, and what we can do to fix the problem going forward. There is a way to do it, and we can do it if you understand what the problem is.
Okay.
Great.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. There was so much information. I recommend that everybody definitely check out the book because there's a lot more information to take in there. So, of course, we have so many questions. One of the things that came up the most, especially during the ultra-processed foods section, was how do we know how to avoid these foods? Can you give examples? Are there things like fast food, bags of chips, candy bars, like all the things we might think of? Or are there things that we think are healthy and we're eating?
Oh, there are things that are healthy. There are things that you think are healthy that are in that ultra-processed food category. Best example, yogurt. Okay, who here thinks yogurt is healthy? Well, plain yogurt is healthy. Okay, now if you look at the side of the package, it will tell you dietary sugars, 7 grams. That's all lactose, milk sugar. That's fine. Nothing wrong with lactose, unless, of course, you're lactose intolerant, right? But now look at a strawberry yogurt, 23 grams of sugar. So that means 16 grams of added sugar to that yogurt, right? All sucrose, all high fructose corn syrup, all problem, okay? That sugar turned a class 2 product, plain yogurt, into a class 4 product, ultra-processed food product. Another example, Raisin Bran. Okay, who here thinks Raisin Bran is healthy? They say it's healthy. So here's a question. If you take the raisins in Raisin Bran and you figure out the sugar content of the raisins in one scoop or one portion of Raisin Bran, how many grams of sugar is that? It's 11. But if you look at the side of the package, it will tell you that 1 cup of Raisin Bran is 18 grams of sugar. How come the raisins are 11, but Raisin Bran's 18? And the answer is, what color are the raisins? Are they purple or are they white? They are white. Why are they white? Because they have all been dipped in a sugar solution to make them sweeter. So all sorts of things have been done to the food without your knowledge, and they very specifically don't want to tell you. So how can you find out? I will tell you how you can find out. We have developed, my colleagues and I have developed a tool. It's online. We're trying to turn it into an app, but right now it is just a computer program. But you can access it right now if you want, while we're talking. It is called Perfect, P-E-R-F-A-C-T. And you can find it at http://perfect.co, not com, co, perfect.co. And you will see that there are 4 filters, and one of them is called the Nova filter. If you click on it, okay, it will show you all of the items that are in Target, Walmart, and Amazon. It can do it for your store at your house. If you know, as long as they have their SKUs online, which most of them do, so you can basically toggle to find your store. Okay, but right now it's as demonstration, it's Walmart, Amazon, Target. Okay, 40,000 items, and if you click the Nova filter, it will filter out all of the Nova Class 4 items and only show you the Nova Class 1 through 3 items. And guess what the number of items goes down to? From 40,000 down to 10,000.
Wow.
You have lost 75% of the store by getting rid of the Nova Class 4. The point is, you don't know what the other 30,000 items are, but this will teach you. And then you can actually shop appropriately, metabolically, healthfully, and mindfully to get the right stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's really good to know. I'm going to look at that as soon as we get off of here.
Perfect.co.
One of the other topics that I saw coming up a lot in the chat and in the questions were, and you mentioned it's not being overweight that's necessarily the killer. It's the ultra processed in our diet. We had a lot of people asking about the different kinds of lifestyle diets, like veganism and keto. And you and I even talked about those documentaries that are out there on Netflix.
Yep. They all suck.
Can you speak a little bit more about
in 10 words or less, they all suck. There are a whole bunch of documentaries that are vegan propaganda. All right. Just remember, okay, vegans do not have an increased lifespan, and vegans have an increased rate of depression. Now, if you want to be vegan, it's fine. I'm not against veganism. I'm also not for it. Okay. If you're going to be vegan, that's fine, as long as you provide yourself with the appropriate supplements. And those supplements include various vitamins and flavonoids, which you can't get out of fruits and vegetables. And you have to the real issue is omega-3s. And the other issue is, if you're eating ultra-processed vegan foods, you are eating a lot of emulsifiers to keep the fat and the water together. And also tryptophan, which is very low in fruits and vegetables. And you really need an animal source, unless you want to take a supplement. And if you're going to take a supplement, then you should take 5-hydroxytryptophan in order to get your serotonin up. So you can be vegan, but you have to do it right. And most people don't. If you're going to be keto, that's okay too, if you do it right. But, people fall off the wagon very easily with keto. Most people who are on keto and they're doing it by themselves, by 2 months, they're not on keto anymore. And you can prove it by checking your ketones, and basically they're gone, because carbohydrate has infiltrated into your diet. So I am not for keto. I'm not against it. I am not for vegan. I'm not against it. There are a whole bunch of diets that work all over the world. Okay. So vegan, keto,
Fat Chance cookbook, right?
Yep. Yes. The Fat Chance cookbook is a no added sugar, high fiber cookbook. That's a cookbook we my colleague Cindy Gershon and I wrote back in 2014, which basically takes all these principles and enacts them for people to be able to feed their kids. And every recipe was vetted by a Mount Diablo high school student to be producible, consumable, and delicious in 30 minutes or less, with nothing more complicated than a blender.
Okay. Well, we are putting a link to that in the resources tab. So anybody who wants to take a look at the Fat Chance cookbook, that'll be there. I know that we are running short on time. We did have quite a few questions about, is it ever too late? So Kate and Catherine both want to know, at the age of 70 and being brought up on processed foods, is it too late to turn their health around?
No. No, I'm not going to tell you that you can go back to being 25. Okay. That's not likely, but it's never too late to basically start dealing with these subcellular pathologies. Your cells will work better if you deal with these, okay, if you do some maintenance, okay, so you can keep that Lamborghini from completely becoming a jalopy, okay? I mean, it may not be, it may not be a high performance Lamborghini, but it's still a Lamborghini as long as you didn't let it turn into a jalopy. So if you decide that, it's time to fix it, there is nothing such thing as too late.
Good to know for all of us. Well, I want to close with Bridget's question. Bridget says, Hi, Dr. Lustig. I'm one of your biggest fans. I practice the 4 C's, feed my gut, and protect my liver as best I can. After reading Metabolical, I gave a very well-received talk at GPL in the spring of 2021 that highlighted many of the important lessons you imparted through your work. Thank you for all of your careful research. My question is, if you could go back to 2020 when you were writing this book and could add one more important piece of advice for your readers, what would it be?
Ooh. So I will tell you, the book actually only has protect the liver, feed the gut. It doesn't have support the brain. And and there's a reason, and that is because the book was 500 and some odd pages. And, if I put in the support the brain, it would have extended the book by another 100 pages. And, it was already a problem. It was such a problem that I actually had to take the references and move them online because the references were 70 pages by themselves.
Wow.
So that was, so if I could go back and add it, I would do that, right? That would be one thing. The other thing that I think I would add is I didn't spend a lot of time on B vitamins and Alzheimer's disease. And we've now learned that homocysteine is a really important factor in the development of Alzheimer's disease. And B vitamins, particularly folate, is super important in terms of trying to mitigate that problem. And we now have data that if you give both B vitamins and vitamin D to patients with mild cognitive decline, you can prevent and in some cases even reverse it. This is work out of the UK. So that's probably something I would, spend a little time on.
I don't know. I feel a new volume coming on, or a new edition.
Well, there is a new volume, and it will have some of this. It's going to be on the amygdala.
Okay.
Ground zero for all chronic disease.
Okay.
So look for it. The tentative title will be Amygdala Unchained.
And are we thinking that's going to come out this year?
No, it'll probably be 2 years from now. It's
Okay.
going to take a while. I'm writing it with my good friend and colleague here at UCSF, Alyssa Eppel. And so we're figuring 18 months to write it and then 6 months, to, massage it and get it into form. So it'll probably be beginning of 2026.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, people have 3 other books to catch up on, a lot of good reading to do. Thank you so much for your time today, and coming to
Been my pleasure. And thank you all for sticking it out with me, everyone.
Absolutely. And to that same regard, I want to extend a huge thank you to our audience. Of course, without you, none of the support would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. I did mention the resources folder. So below the live stream video in the Rate This Program tab, you'll see a link to the resources folder where the 4 books, including the cookbook, will be there. Thank you so much again for attending. We look forward to seeing you all February 8th when we speak to New York Times bestselling rom-com author Tessa Bailey. And again on February 20th when we chat with National Book Award winner Jason Mott.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, LSC, for doing, this public service. It's very important.
Thank you so much for your time today.